February 20th, 1959. Ural Polytechnic Institute, Sverdlovsk, Soviet Russia. The sports club waited. They checked the clock. They checked the door. They checked the phone. Nothing. Igor Dyatlov's expedition was supposed to send word by today. A telegram. A phone call. Something. Anything to confirm they'd completed their trek through the northern Urals and were heading home. The silence stretched. Hours became a full day, still nothing. Lev Gordo, head of the sports club, tried to stay calm. He told himself there were 100 reasonable explanations. Bad weather, delayed return, extended route. These things happened on difficult expeditions. The group was experienced. They knew what they were doing. But families were calling now. Worried voices asking questions he couldn't answer. Where were their children? Why hadn't they checked in? When would they be home? Gordo made a decision he would later regret. He lied. He told the families he'd received a telegram from Dyatlov about a delay. He said everything was fine. The group was safe. They'd be back soon. He thought he was preventing panic. He thought he was being responsible. He thought wrong. Because in the forests of the northern Urals, something had already happened. Something so inexplicable that 65 years later, people are still trying to understand it. Something that would turn 9 young lives into one of history's most enduring mysteries. The group wasn't delayed. They weren't lost. They weren't safe. They were dead, all 9 of them, and the way they died would defy every logical explanation. But nobody knew that yet. January 23rd, 1959, 28 days earlier. 10 young people boarded a train in Sverdlovsk. They were laughing, joking, excited. They had backpacks full of supplies, skis strapped together, and 3 weeks of adventure ahead of them. This wasn't a casual hike. This was a Category 3 expedition, the highest difficulty level in the Soviet system. A 190-mile cross-country ski trek through some of the harshest terrain in Russia, through mountains where temperatures dropped to negative 40 degrees Celsius, where storms appeared without warning, where one mistake could mean death. But these weren't amateurs. They were the best, students and graduates from Ural Polytechnic Institute. All of them held Grade 2 hiking certification. If they completed this trek, they'd earn Grade 3, the elite classification, the mark of true expertise. Igor Dyatlov was their leader, 23 years old, radio engineering student, experienced mountaineer. He'd planned this route himself, meticulously, every campsite, every supply cache, every contingency. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22. They called her Zina. She was one of 2 women on the expedition, radio engineering major. She kept a diary, wrote poetry, had a crush on Igor that everyone knew about but nobody mentioned. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, power engineering student. It was his birthday on January 29th. The group would celebrate with him in the wilderness. He'd brought his guitar, planned to play songs around the campfire. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, economics student, the other woman. Everyone called her Luda. She had a fiery spirit. Once survived a hunting accident. Wasn't afraid of anything. Rustam Slobodin, 23, electrical engineering graduate, strong, reliable, the kind of person you wanted on a difficult expedition. Alexander Kolvatov, 24, nuclear physics student, quiet, methodical, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Nikolai Thiboksbrig-Knowles, 23, construction engineering student, French ancestry. Everyone called him Kalia. He joined the expedition late, last-minute decision. Yuri Krivonishenko, 24, engineering student, World War II survivor, sense of humor that kept the group's spirits up. He worked at a nuclear facility called Mayak, helped with contamination cleanup. Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, the oldest, a World War II veteran, sports instructor. He went by the name Sasha. He joined even later than Kalia. Some people thought that was strange. Why would a veteran in his late 30s want to join a group of students on a dangerous winter expedition? And finally, Yuri Yudin, 21, geology student. He was excited, ready, couldn't wait to get into the mountains. The train pulled out of the station. 3 weeks, that's all it would take. By February 12th, they'd be back. Heroes, elite mountaineers, people who'd conquered one of Russia's most difficult routes. None of them would live that long. January 28th, 1959. Second Northern Settlement, Northern Urals. The group prepared to leave civilization behind. This was their last stop, the last outpost. From here it was wilderness, pure, unforgiving, deadly wilderness. Yuri Yudin felt it first, the pain in his back, sharp, persistent. His sciatica was flaring up. He'd had problems with it before, but this was worse, much worse. He pulled Igor aside. They talked quietly. The decision was agonizing. Yudin wanted to continue. This was the expedition he'd been training for, but the pain was too much. He couldn't keep up. He'd slow the group down, put them at risk. Igor understood. They said goodbye. The group gave Yudin their letters to mail, their messages to family, proof that everything was going well, that they were safe, that they'd see everyone soon. Yudin watched them leave. 9 figures on skis moving into the forest. He waved. They waved back. He turned around, started the long journey home alone. He would be the only survivor, the only one to ever come back, and for the rest of his life he would carry the weight of that day. The day he turned around, the day he left his friends, the day that saved his life and condemned theirs. But he didn't know that yet. None of them did. January 28th, 31st, 1959. The group moved north. They followed the Lazva River, then turned onto the Ospia. The going was slow. The snow was deep, wet. They had to scrape it from their skis constantly. But spirits were high. They were doing what they loved, surrounded by friends in the wilderness, free. Zina wrote in her diary every night. She described the landscape, the camaraderie, the small jokes and moments that made the expedition special. She wrote about seeing Mansi signs along the trail, wondered what they meant. The Mansi were indigenous people, reindeer herders. They knew these mountains better than anyone. On January 29th, they celebrated Yuri Doroshenko's 21st birthday, sang songs, shared food, made jokes, took photographs. Everything was going according to plan. They saw more Mansi signs, trail markers, a labaz, storage cache built in a tree, evidence that this route was well traveled, that people passed through here regularly. That made them feel safer, less isolated. On January 31st, they reached another labaz, decided to leave some of their supplies there, lightening their load for the difficult terrain ahead. They'd pick everything up on the return journey, store excess food, extra equipment they didn't need for the final push to Mount Otort. Mount Otort, that was their destination, the peak they were climbing toward. In the Mansi language, Otort meant don't go there. They should have listened. February 1st, 1959, morning. The group woke early. They had a difficult day ahead. They were approaching Khalat Siakal. In Mansi, that name meant Dead Mountain. The weather was deteriorating, wind picking up, visibility dropping, snow beginning to fall. These were signs, warning signs. Experienced mountaineers read weather like other people read books. And what the weather was saying was clear: storm coming, find shelter, wait it out. But they'd come so far. Mount Autorton was close, just a bit further. If they pushed through, they could make it. Set up base camp, wait out the storm from a good position. They pressed on. The photographs from their cameras would later show them smiling, working together, setting up camp. The last images of living people who had no idea they had hours left. Around 5 p.m. they found a spot. Not ideal, the slope of Khalat Siakal, about 300 meters from the summit, exposed. But with the storm closing in and darkness approaching, they didn't have better options. They cut into the slope, flattened an area for their tent. This was standard procedure. You couldn't pitch a tent on a slanted snow surface. You had to create a platform. The tent went up. 9 people crowded inside. It wasn't comfortable, but it was shelter, protection from the wind, the storm. Someone wrote a satirical newspaper. They called it Evening Autor. It was funny, lighthearted, full of inside jokes. They were in good spirits, not afraid, not worried. They ate dinner, changed into sleeping clothes, got ready for the night. The plan was to sleep here, wake up, wait for the storm to pass if it was still raging, then continue to Mount Autor, complete the expedition, go home as heroes. That's not what happened. February 1st, 1959, after midnight. We don't know exactly when it started, the precise moment, the exact trigger, but sometime after midnight, something went catastrophically wrong. Inside the tent, 9 people were sleeping. The wind was howling. The temperature was dropping. Standard winter storm conditions. Nothing they hadn't experienced before. And then something happened. Something that made them panic. Something so terrifying, so urgent, that they made a decision that would kill them. They cut their way out of the tent, from the inside, using knives, slashing through the canvas in multiple places. Not through the entrance, not the normal way out, through the sides, through the walls, desperate, frantic, rushed. They fled into the night, into the storm, into temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius or lower, wind chills that would freeze exposed skin in seconds. They ran without proper clothing, some in just underwear, some with one boot, some barefoot. 9 sets of footprints led away from the tent, down the slope, toward the tree line, over 1.5 kilometers away. The footprints showed no signs of panic, no running, just walking, normal pace, orderly, as if they were calmly leaving, as if they had a plan. But they'd left everything behind. Their coats, their boots, their supplies, everything they needed to survive in this environment, all of it abandoned in the tent. What would make 9 experienced mountaineers do that? What would make them leave their shelter, their gear, their only protection against the deadly cold? The official investigation would later conclude they'd fled from an unknown compelling force. But what was that force? February 1st, 2nd, 1959, the forest. The tree line was 1.5 kilometers from the tent. That's a long walk in -30 degree weather, especially when you're not dressed for it. But they made it, all 9 of them. Their footprints proved it. At the forest edge, there was a large cedar tree. They stopped there. 2 of them decided to climb it. Or maybe they were told to climb it. We'll never know. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both named Yuri, both in their early 20s, both freezing to death. They climbed about 5 meters up, broke branches as they went. Were they trying to see something? The tent, perhaps, looking for something up the slope, trying to signal someone, or trying to gather wood for a fire while avoiding the deep snow on the ground. Below the tree, they attempted to start a fire. They succeeded, small, barely enough heat to matter, but it was something. Krivonishenko's hands were badly burned, third-degree burns, the kind you don't get from briefly touching flame, the kind you get from holding your hands in fire, deliberately, for a long time. Why would he do that? Was he trying to stay conscious, the pain keeping him awake, or was he so hypothermic he couldn't feel it anymore? Hypothermia does strange things to the mind, makes you feel hot when you're freezing, makes you do irrational things. Both Yuris died there, under that cedar tree, hypothermia, their bodies found months later, partially undressed. Krivonishenko was wearing only underwear. Doroshenko had one boot, nothing else. The others didn't stay with them. Couldn't, wouldn't. The cold was too much. Staying still meant death. They had to keep moving, had to try something else. 3 of them decided to return to the tent, to try to get their gear, their clothing, to save themselves. They never made it. February 1st, 2nd, 1959, between the cedar tree and the tent. Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, Rustam Slobodin, 3 people, all trying to get back to the tent, back to shelter, back to survival. They died at different points along the route, spread out over hundreds of meters, like they'd collapsed one by one as the cold took them. Their bodies were found in positions suggesting they'd been trying to crawl, to keep moving, to stay alive. Rustam Slobodin made it about 480 meters from the cedar tree. He died with a small fracture in his skull, not enough to kill him. The medical examiner ruled it wasn't the cause of death. He froze. But where did that fracture come from? A fall, a blow, nobody knows. Zina Kolmogorova made it about 630 meters, further than Rustam. She died face down in the snow, wearing some clothing she'd taken from the dead Yuris at the cedar tree. It wasn't enough. She froze. Igor Dyatlov, the leader, the one who'd planned this expedition, the one responsible for everyone, he made it furthest, about 300 meters from the tent, so close. But the cold took him too. He died reaching for the tent he'd never make it to, for the shelter that could have saved him. All 3 showed signs of minor injuries, bruising, small abrasions, nothing severe, nothing that explained their behavior, nothing that explained why they'd fled the tent in the first place. The search party would find these 5 bodies first. The 2 Yuris under the cedar tree. Igor, Zina, and Rustam spread out between the tree and the tent, all dead from hypothermia, all in various states of undress, all having made completely irrational decisions that led directly to their deaths. But where were the other 4? Alexander Kolvatov, Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles, Semyon Zolotaryov, Lyudmila Dubinina, 4 people still missing, 4 bodies not yet found. And when they were discovered, the mystery would get much, much worse. February 20th, 26th, 1959. Back in Sverdlovsk, the lies had stopped working. The families knew something was wrong. The sports club knew something was wrong. The university knew something was wrong. On February 20th, the first search parties were organized. Students, Faculty, volunteers, people who knew the mountains, people who'd hiked with Dyatlov before. They headed north, retracing the expedition's planned route, looking for signs, for camps, for any indication of where the group might be. The search was difficult. The weather was terrible. Snowstorms, whiteouts, conditions that made visibility nearly impossible, conditions that made searching nearly suicidal. But they kept going. Families were counting on them. 9 people were out there somewhere. They needed help. On February 26th, 6 days after the search began, they found it. The tent, on the slope of Kalet-Siakal, almost completely buried in snow. The searchers approached carefully. They saw the cuts, multiple slash marks through the canvas, made from the inside, made with knives, made in panic. Inside was everything, all the gear, all the supplies, boots, coats, food, cameras, diaries, everything you'd need to survive, all abandoned. And leading away from the tent down the slope toward the tree line were footprints. Lots of them, 9 sets. Some were barefoot, some wore only socks, some had one boot. The searchers looked at each other. Experienced mountaineers, people who understood the deadly cold of these mountains, people who knew what it meant to leave shelter without proper clothing. It meant the group was dead. It had to. Nobody survived this, not in negative 30-degree weather, not without gear, not for more than a few hours at most. The search party followed the footprints down the slope, into the forest, to the tree line, to the cedar tree. And they found the first bodies. February 27th, 1959, the cedar tree. Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonishenko, both lying beneath the cedar tree, both partially undressed, both clearly dead from hypothermia. The searchers looked closer. Krivonishenko's hands were burned, badly. The skin charred, 3rd-degree burns. There were remnants of a fire, small, barely anything, but they'd tried. They'd climbed the tree too, broken branches up to 5 meters high, trying to see something, trying to signal, trying to get wood without trudging through deep snow. The searchers kept looking, following the footprints back toward the tent, and they found 3 more bodies. Igor Dyatlov, about 300 meters from the tent, lying face down, one hand stretched toward the tent he'd never reach. Zina Kolmogorova, about 630 meters from the cedar tree, wearing clothing that didn't belong to her, clothing from one of the dead Yuris. It hadn't been enough. Rustam Slobodin, about 480 meters from the cedar tree, a small fracture in his skull, but that's not what killed him. The cold did. 5 bodies, 5 deaths from hypothermia, 5 experienced mountaineers who'd made the absolutely irrational decision to leave their tent without proper gear and walk to their deaths in the freezing wilderness. But where were the other 4? The search intensified. They looked near the cedar tree, deeper into the forest, back toward the tent. Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. The snow was too deep, the conditions too harsh. The search was called off. They'd resume in May when the snow started melting. The families grieved. 5 dead, confirmed. The other 4 presumably dead too, just not found yet. A tragic accident, a terrible loss, but at least they knew. At least they had bodies to bury. But when May came, when the snow melted, when the last 4 bodies were finally discovered, everything changed. May 4th, 1959, 3 months after the incident. A Mansi hunter was walking through the forest. His dog started acting strange, agitated, barking at something. The hunter followed. The dog led him to a ravine, about 75 meters from the cedar tree, deeper into the forest. He saw something, cut branches arranged deliberately, a makeshift shelter, a den dug into the snow. He looked closer, and he saw them, 4 bodies, buried under 4 meters of snow, lying in a stream at the bottom of the ravine, partially preserved by the cold water, partially decomposed. He ran, found the searchers, brought them back. They dug carefully, excavated the snow, exposed what was underneath. Alexander Kolvatov, Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles, Semyon Zolotaryov, Lyudmila Dubinina, the last 4 members of the Dyatlov group, finally found. But something was wrong. These bodies were different. These deaths were different. These injuries were different. Thiboksbrignoles had a major skull fracture. Severe. Pieces of bone were embedded in his brain. The kind of trauma you get from massive impact, from being hit by something heavy, moving fast. Zolotaryov and Dubinina had crushed chests, multiple rib fractures, bilateral, both sides. The ribs were broken by enormous pressure. The medical examiner would later compare it to being hit by a car or an explosion. The force required was immense. But here's what made it truly strange. There were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin, no cuts, no visible trauma. The damage was all internal, bones shattered, organs damaged, but the skin intact. How do you crush someone's ribs without leaving a mark on their skin? And then there were the missing body parts. May 9th, 1959, autopsy room. Boris Vozrozhdeny was the forensic medical examiner. He performed the autopsies on the first 5 bodies, standard hypothermia cases, tragic but explicable. But these 4 were different. He could see that immediately. Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old, economics student, fiery spirit. She'd had the worst of it. Her tongue was missing, completely. Not torn out, not damaged, missing. The hypoglossal muscle was gone too, the muscles of the floor of her mouth, all absent. Her eyes were gone, eye sockets empty, not damaged, not torn, just empty. Part of her lips were missing, facial tissue removed, a fragment of skull bone gone. Vozrozhdeny examined the wounds carefully. This wasn't mutilation in the traditional sense. There were no cuts, no tears, no signs of violence. The tissue was just absent, as if it had decomposed or been eaten. Dubinina had been lying in the stream, face down, water running over her for 3 months. Scavenging animals had access to the body. Decomposition would have been accelerated. Soft tissue would be vulnerable. Eyes, tongue, lips, these would be the first things to go. That was the logical explanation, the scientific explanation, the one Vozrozhdeny included in his report. But it didn't explain everything. The stomach contents showed about 100 grams of dark brown mucosal mass. Some people claimed this was blood, that she'd been bleeding internally, that her heart had still been beating when the tongue was removed, that she'd been alive when it happened. Vozrozhdeny didn't confirm that interpretation, but he didn't completely deny it either. Semyon Zolotaryov, his eyes were missing too, empty sockets, the same clean absence, the same lack of trauma. He also had massive chest injuries, ribs fractured, internal bleeding, but no external wounds. Alexander Kolvatov, his eyebrows were missing. Again, clean removal, no violence, just absence. 4 bodies, massive internal trauma, missing soft tissue, all found in a ravine. all wearing clothing that had been taken from the dead Yuris back at the cedar tree. And some of that clothing was radioactive. May 1959, Sverdlovsk Forensic Laboratory. The clothing was tested, standard procedure, checking for any evidence, any clues, anything that might explain what happened. Some items showed elevated radiation levels, not all of them, just some. Krivonishenko's trousers, the ones Dubinina had been wearing when she died, radioactive. One of the sweaters found at the ravine, radioactive. Not massively, not dangerously high to investigators handling the evidence, but measurably elevated above background radiation. Why how? The lead radiologist testified. He said the contamination could be from radioactive dust, fallout from the atmosphere, but that didn't make much sense. Why only some clothing? Why not all of it? Why not the bodies themselves? Another explanation emerged. Krivonishenko had worked at Mayak, a nuclear facility. He'd helped with cleanup after the Kishtim disaster 2 years earlier. A nuclear incident, a serious one. He'd been exposed to radiation. His clothing might have been contaminated. That would explain his trousers. But what about the sweater? What about the other items? Nobody had a good answer, so it went into the report, documented, unexplained, just another piece of this impossible puzzle. The Soviet authorities were nervous about the radiation finding. Nuclear incidents were state secrets. Discussing them was dangerous. The Kishtim disaster had been completely suppressed. Nobody outside the Soviet Union even knew it had happened. Radiation in the clothing of dead students was a problem, a political problem, a PR problem. It raised questions, questions that couldn't be answered without revealing state secrets. So they made a decision. May 28, 1959. 3 weeks after the last 4 bodies were discovered, less than a month after the autopsies, the investigation was closed. The official conclusion: the group died from an unknown compelling force. That was it. That was the entire explanation. An unknown compelling force. No specifics, no details, no real answers. 6 of them died from hypothermia. That much was clear. Igor, Zina, Rustam, and the 2 Yuris, they froze to death. The other 3 died from physical trauma. Thybok Brignoles with his skull fracture, Zolotaryov and Dubinina with their crushed chests. But what caused those injuries? The report didn't say. No evidence of foul play. That was the conclusion. No evidence of other people at the scene. Only the footprints of the 9 group members. No signs of struggle. No defensive wounds. No indication of an attack. No evidence of animal involvement. The injuries weren't consistent with a bear attack or any other predator. The footprints leaving the tent were human, walking calmly, not running from something chasing them. So what happened? What was the unknown compelling force? What made 9 experienced mountaineers flee their tent in panic, cut their way out from the inside, run into deadly cold without proper clothing? What was it? The report didn't answer, couldn't answer, or wouldn't answer. The case files were classified, sealed, placed in archives marked secret. They would remain there for decades, hidden from public view, protected by Soviet bureaucracy. The families were told there had been an accident, a tragic accident. Their children were dead. Here are the bodies. Please bury them and move on. Don't ask questions. Don't make trouble. This is a state matter now. The funerals were held. 5 of the 9 in Sverdlovsk. Witnesses reported something strange. The bodies had an unusual color, deep brown, almost tan, as if they'd been in the sun. But they'd died in winter, in the snow. Where had that color come from? Nobody asked officially. Nobody documented it. Nobody investigated. The bodies were buried. The case was closed. But the mystery was just beginning. 1950-1990, the Soviet Union. The Dyatlov Pass incident was forbidden. That's the best way to describe it. Talking about it was dangerous. Asking questions was dangerous. Being too curious was very dangerous. The area around the incident was closed. Hikers were banned for 3 years. The official reason was safety. Unstated reason was control. Keep people away. Keep them from finding things. Keep them from asking questions. The families were watched, monitored. They knew it. Everyone knew it. This was the Soviet Union. The KGB watched everything, especially things that made the government uncomfortable. Yuri Yudin was the only survivor, the one who turned back on January 28th, the one whose sciatica had saved his life. He tried to find answers, tried to understand what had happened to his friends, tried to get access to the investigation files. He was denied. Repeatedly, for decades, he pushed. He demanded, he argued, it didn't matter. The files stayed sealed. The answers stayed hidden. Rumors spread anyway. You can't stop rumors, especially about something this strange, this inexplicable. The Soviet people loved mysteries, loved conspiracy theories, especially ones involving their own government. Some said it was a weapons test, a secret military experiment, something that went wrong. The government killed the students to cover it up. The radiation proved it. The strange injuries proved it. Some said it was aliens, a UFO. Orange spheres had been sighted in the sky that night. Witnesses about 50 miles away reported strange lights. The missing eyes and tongue suggested abduction, experimentation. The government knew and was covering it up. Some said it was the Mansi people, indigenous revenge for trespassing on sacred ground. Kaletsiakl meant dead mountain for a reason. The Dyatlov group had ignored warnings, paid the price. The government covered it up to avoid racial tensions. Some said it was a Yeti. The satirical newspaper Evening Autor joked about a snowman. What if it wasn't a joke? What if they'd seen something, encountered something? The injuries were consistent with massive force, non-human force. All of these theories spread underground, passed from person to person, whispered in private, written in Samizdat publications, never official, never documented, always suppressed. The Soviet government said nothing, confirmed nothing, denied nothing, just maintained official silence and kept the case files locked away. Until 1990, when everything changed. 1990-1991, the Soviet Union collapses. Glasnost, perestroika, opening, restructuring. Gorbachev was dismantling the old system, releasing information that had been suppressed for decades. The KGB archives were opening. State secrets were becoming public knowledge. The Dyatlov Pass files were declassified. Finally, after 31 years, people could see what the investigators had actually found, what the reports actually said, what the evidence actually showed. Researchers descended on the files. Journalists, historians, conspiracy theorists, everyone who'd been curious for 3 decades. And what they found was frustrating. The files were incomplete. Pages were missing. Photographs were missing. Key documents that should have been there weren't. Either they'd been removed deliberately, or the investigation had been so poorly conducted that they'd never existed in the first place. What was there raised more questions than it answered? The autopsy reports, the photographs of the bodies, the crime scene documentation, all of it strange, all of it inexplicable, all of it consistent with a cover-up or gross incompetence, or both. Anatoly Gushchin published the first book. The price of state secrets is 9 lives. He argued it was a military weapons test, a secret experiment. The radiation proved it. The government's secrecy proved it. The students had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They'd seen something they shouldn't have, paid the price. Others disagreed, published their own books, their own theories. The debate exploded into public consciousness. The Dyatlov Pass incident became famous, not just in Russia but internationally, a mystery that transcended borders, languages, generations. Yuri Yudin finally got to see the files, finally got some answers. They weren't enough. They didn't explain what had happened. They didn't give him closure. He continued searching, continued investigating, continued hoping that someone, somewhere would finally figure it out. He died in 2013, 54 years after the incident, still waiting for answers, still believing they were out there, still convinced that the truth had been suppressed and needed to be revealed. And in 2019, the Russian government reopened the case. 2019, Russian Federation. 60 years after the incident, the families of the victims petitioned the Russian government. They wanted a new investigation, modern forensics, new technology, better analysis, real answers. The government agreed. Andrei Kuryakov led the investigation, experienced prosecutor. He approached it systematically, reviewed all the old evidence, examined all the theories, applied modern scientific understanding. His conclusion, Avalanche, specifically a slab avalanche, a delayed collapse of snow onto the tent. The theory went like this. The group cut into the slope to set up their tent. This destabilized the snow above, but it didn't collapse immediately. The wind continued to blow, depositing more snow, building up weight, creating pressure. Hours later, while they slept, the snow slab broke loose. It wasn't a traditional avalanche. The slope was only 23 degrees, not steep enough for a classic avalanche, but steep enough for a localized slab to slide. The snow hit the tent, not with enough force to kill anyone, but with enough force to crush the tent, to make them think a bigger avalanche was coming, to make them panic. They cut their way out, from the inside, grabbed whatever clothing they could reach in the chaos, fled downslope, away from what they thought was certain death. They ran to what they thought was a safe distance, the cedar tree, built a fire, tried to survive, but the cold was too much. Some tried to return to the tent, didn't make it. Others stayed in the forest, built a den in the ravine for shelter, eventually died there when injuries from falls in the dark forest and hypothermia took them. The radiation from Krivonishenko's contaminated work clothing, the missing soft tissue, decomposition and scavenging, the internal injuries without external bruising, falls onto rocks and debris hidden under the snow in the dark. It all made sense. Logically, scientifically, the avalanche theory explained everything. The panic, the flight from the tent, the irrational behavior, the injuries. But did it really explain everything? 2019-2020, International response. The international community of Dyatlov researchers wasn't convinced. Neither were many Russian experts. The avalanche theory had problems, serious problems. First problem, the tent. When it was discovered, it was still standing. Partially collapsed, yes, but the poles were intact. The structure was intact. An avalanche strong enough to injure people inside would have completely destroyed it, would have scattered gear everywhere, would have left obvious signs of violent impact. None of that was present. Second problem, the footprints. 9 sets of orderly footprints led away from the tent, walking, not running, not chaotic. If they just survived a terrifying avalanche, would they walk calmly away? Wouldn't there be signs of panic? Wouldn't some prints show running, stumbling? None did. Third problem, the timing. The tent was found on February 26th, 25 days after the incident, partially buried in snow. But if an avalanche had hit it on February 1st, it would have been completely buried. The site would have been unrecognizable. Instead, searchers found it relatively easily. The structure still visible. Fourth problem, the ravine injuries. Thibox-Brignol's skull fracture, Zolotaryov and Dubinina's crushed chests. The medical examiner in 1959 specifically noted these weren't from falls. The force was too great, too uniform, too bilateral. Falls cause asymmetric injuries. One side hits harder. One area takes more damage. These injuries were symmetric. Both sides of the ribcage, evenly fractured. That's not how fall injuries present. Fifth problem, the radiation. Kuryakov's explanation was Krivonishenko's work clothing. But the contamination wasn't just on his trousers. It was on a sweater too. A sweater that wasn't his. That didn't come from Mayak. Where did that radiation come from? Sixth problem, why cut the tent? If an avalanche had collapsed the tent, they'd be trapped under snow, struggling to breathe, fighting to escape. They'd cut upward, toward air, toward freedom. But the cuts in the Dyatlov tent were lateral, through the sides, as if they were exiting deliberately, methodically, not trapped, not buried, just fleeing something that made them want to leave. Fast. Critics published papers, books, videos, all arguing the avalanche theory didn't fit the evidence, wasn't consistent with the facts, was a convenient explanation that let the government close the case. Again, after 60 years, still without real answers. So if it wasn't an avalanche, what was it? 2013, International Journal of Outdoor Medicine and Physical Therapy. Dr. Vladimir Borzenkov published a paper, a new theory, not avalanche, not weapons test, not Yeti, infrasound. Infrasound is sound below the range of human hearing, below 20 hertz. Humans can't consciously hear it, but they can feel it, and it has effects, documented effects, disturbing effects. Exposure to certain frequencies of infrasound causes anxiety, panic, fear, paranoia, physical symptoms like pressure in the ears, difficulty breathing, chest pain. At high enough intensities, it can cause nausea, disorientation, irrational behavior. Where does infrasound come from in nature? Wind. Specifically, wind blowing over certain terrain formations can create standing waves of infrasound. Mountains, valleys, caves, the right shape, the right wind speed, and you get infrasound resonance. The night of February 1st, 1959, there was a strong wind. The Dyatlov group camped on an exposed slope. The wind was blowing across the mountain at high speed. Perfect conditions for infrasound generation. The theory goes like this: the group was sleeping. The wind created infrasound. Low frequency waves built up inside the tent. They couldn't hear it, but they felt it. Intense anxiety, panic, chest pressure, difficulty breathing, feeling like they were being crushed, suffocated. In their panic, they thought the tent was going to collapse, or that something was attacking them, or that they couldn't breathe. They needed to get out, now, immediately. No time to gather gear, no time to put on boots. Just cut through the tent and run. Once outside, away from the tent, the infrasound effect diminished. They could think more clearly, but now they were exposed to deadly cold. Without proper clothing, they had to make choices. Some tried to return to the tent. Some stayed at the cedar tree. Some built a den in the ravine. The internal injuries, separate incident, after they'd left the tent. In their panicked, hypothermic state, they fell. Rocks hidden under snow in the ravine, falls in darkness, impact trauma that crushed ribs and fractured skulls. The theory explained the panic, the irrational flight from the tent, the lack of external injuries from the tent itself, the orderly footprints. They weren't running from something chasing them. They were walking away from something they'd left behind. It was elegant, scientific, testable. Researchers could model wind patterns, calculate infrasound frequencies, see if conditions were right. And when they did, they found something interesting. 2019, Switzerland. Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow, and Landscape Research. Two researchers, Johann Gaum and Alexander Puzrin, decided to test the Dyatlov Pass conditions, not for infrasound, for avalanche, but their methods were relevant to both theories. They used computer simulations, modeled the snow conditions, the slope angle, the wind speed, everything they could know about February 1st, 1959. They found that a slab avalanche was theoretically possible, but not probable. The conditions had to be exactly right. The slope had to be at the upper edge of stability. The wind had to deposit snow at exactly the right rate. The tent cut had to weaken the slope at exactly the right point. All possible, but unlikely, very unlikely. What was more interesting was their wind analysis. They confirmed that conditions were perfect for Kármán vortex street formation. A specific pattern of wind turbulence creates regular oscillations, regular pressure waves, regular infrasound generation. The frequency, around 1820 Hertz, right at the edge of human hearing, right in the range known to cause panic and anxiety, right in the range known to create feelings of dread and presence. Duration, as long as the wind maintained those speeds, could have been minutes, could have been hours, enough time for the entire group to be affected, enough time for panic to build, for irrational decisions to seem rational. The researchers published their findings. The media covered it. Dyatlov Pass mystery solved, the headlines proclaimed, again, for the 100th time. But the researchers themselves were more cautious. They said their model showed infrasound was plausible, not proven, not certain, just plausible. Because computer models aren't reality, wind doesn't always behave the way equations predict. Real conditions are messier, more complex, more chaotic. And there were still things the infrasound theory couldn't explain. February 1959, multiple locations across the northern Urals. While the Dyatlov group was dying on Khalat Syakhl, other people were in the region, other groups, other witnesses, and they saw something. About 50 miles south, a weather station meteorologist named Takirva was outside. She looked up. She saw glowing spheres, orange, bright, moving across the sky, slowly, deliberately, not like meteors, not like aircraft, like something else. On the same night, a military unit was conducting exercises in the area. Multiple soldiers reported seeing lights, strange lights, orbs glowing, moving in ways that didn't make sense. A group of geology students was camping about 30 miles away. They reported the same thing: orange spheres, floating, pulsing, visible for several minutes before disappearing. This wasn't one witness. This wasn't misidentification. This was multiple independent reports from trained observers, scientists, military personnel, students, all seeing the same thing on the same night, in the same region. The reports were documented, included in the case file, acknowledged by investigators, then ignored, set aside, not explained, not investigated, just noted and moved on. Why? What were those lights? Where did they come from? What were they doing over the northern Urals on the night 9 people died on Khalat Syakhl? Some said rocket tests. The Soviet military was actively testing ballistic missiles. Some launches went wrong. Some debris fell. Maybe the Dyatlov group saw a missile, panicked, ran, died from exposure. That would explain the military interest in the case. The secrecy, the classification, can't admit to a botched missile test, can't admit to killing civilians. Better to say unknown compelling force and seal the files. But it didn't explain the injuries, didn't explain the radiation beyond Krivonishenko, didn't explain why searchers found no missile debris, no impact craters, no burns, nothing. Others said UFO, extraterrestrial craft. The Dyatlov group saw it, maybe approached it, maybe were attacked by it. The orange spheres were the craft. The injuries were from alien weapons. The radiation was from propulsion systems. The cover-up was government suppression of contact. That theory gained traction in the 1990s. Books were written, documentaries were made. Witnesses came forward with additional sightings from that period, all describing similar orange spheres, all in the same general region. But there was no physical evidence, no craft, no debris, no samples, just sightings, and sightings aren't proof. Still, the lights couldn't be dismissed entirely. 1959, the Cold War. The Soviet Union was testing weapons, constantly. Missiles, aircraft, chemical agents, biological weapons, nuclear devices. The northern Urals were remote, sparsely populated, perfect for dangerous experiments. In 1957, the Kishtim disaster occurred. A nuclear waste storage tank exploded at the Mayak facility. Massive contamination. Hundreds of thousands of people exposed. The Soviet government covered it up completely, denied it happened, relocated entire villages, claimed they were moving people for agricultural reasons. Krivonishenko worked at Mayak. He'd been involved in cleanup. He knew about the disaster. He knew state secrets. What if that's why he was on this expedition? Not for hiking, for surveillance, for collection. What if he was monitoring radiation levels in the region, testing contamination spread, and something went wrong? What if the Dyatlov group stumbled onto a test, a weapons test? They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They saw something. The military had to silence them, make it look like an accident, hence the strange injuries, the missing files, the classification. The theory had some support. Military presence in the area was confirmed. The speed with which the case was closed suggested government involvement. The radiation supported some kind of nuclear connection. But it had problems. 9 bodies with varying injuries, some from hypothermia, some from trauma, some with missing tissue. If the military killed them, why make it so complicated? Why not just shoot them, make them disappear? Why leave bodies at all? And the tent. Why would trained soldiers attacking the group allow them to flee, to leave footprints, to die in different locations? Professional killers don't leave that kind of evidence trail. Some researchers modified the theory. Maybe it wasn't an intentional attack. Maybe it was exposure to a weapons test, chemical weapon, biological weapon, something in the air, something that caused panic, made them flee. Then the government covered it up to hide the test. That explained the panic, the flight, the irrational behavior. Chemical agents can cause hallucinations, paranoia, fear, make people do things that kill them. But it didn't explain the specific injuries, the crushed ribs, the skull fracture. Those were physical trauma, not chemical exposure. Every theory explained some things. No theory explained everything. 1959. The indigenous peoples of the Urals. The Mansi people had lived in these mountains for thousands of years. They knew the land, they knew the dangers, they knew which places were safe, which were sacred, which were forbidden. Kalatsiakal, Dead Mountain. The name wasn't random, it meant something. It was a warning. Mount Atorton, don't go there. Another warning, clear, explicit, don't. The Dyatlov group ignored these warnings. They were Soviet citizens, educated, scientific. They didn't believe in indigenous superstitions. Mountains were mountains. Snow was snow. Names were just words. But what if the Mansi knew something? What if Dead Mountain was called that for a reason? What if people had died there before? What if the Mansi avoided it because experience taught them to? Some theories suggested the Mansi attacked the group. Revenge for trespassing on sacred ground. The injuries were from weapons. The missing eyes and tongue were ritual mutilation. The government covered it up to avoid ethnic tensions. But this theory had major problems. The Mansi were interviewed extensively during the investigation. They cooperated fully, showed concern, helped with the search. One Mansi elder even said, "The mountain killed them. We told them not to go." No evidence of Mansi involvement was ever found. No footprints other than the group's. No weapon marks. No indication of attack. The Mansi theory was quickly dismissed by investigators. But dismissing Mansi involvement didn't dismiss Mansi knowledge. Maybe they didn't kill the group, but maybe they knew something about the mountain, about why it was dangerous, about what had happened there before. Some researchers interviewed elderly Mansi in the decades after, asked about Dead Mountain, about the legends, about why they avoided it. The answers were frustratingly vague. Bad spirits, dangerous place. People die there, but no specifics, no details. Either the knowledge had been lost, or they weren't sharing it with outsiders. One elder mentioned wind, bad wind, wind that makes you afraid, wind that drives you mad. Was that infrasound, or just observation that strong wind was dangerous? Another mentioned lights, strange lights, dancing in the sky, spirits. Don't look at them, don't follow them. Was that the orange spheres others had reported, or aurora borealis, or something else? The Mansi weren't the killers, but they might have been the prophets. They warned the Dyatlov group, and they were right. Dead Mountain lived up to its name. February 1st, 1959, the satirical newspaper. Among the Dyatlov group's belongings, searchers found Evening Atorton, the satirical newspaper they'd written, full of jokes, playful, light-hearted. One section mentioned a snowman, a yeti, the group teasing each other about encountering one, about what they'd do, how they'd react. It was funny, a joke, nothing serious. Or was it? Some theorists latched onto this. What if it wasn't a joke? What if they'd seen something? Tracks, signs, evidence of something large living in the mountains. What if they were joking to cope with real fear? The Yeti theory goes like this. Something attacked the tent, something large, strong, non-human. The group fled in panic. The creature pursued, caught some of them, killed them with massive force, crushed their ribs, fractured skulls, then disappeared back into the wilderness. The evidence, the massive injuries, the force required to crush ribs without external bruising, the missing eyes and tongue, the panic, the irrational flight. The problems, everything else. No tracks other than human ones. No hair, no scat, no physical evidence of any large animal. No documented history of aggressive creatures in the region. Bears hibernate in winter. Wolves don't attack groups of humans. What creature would do this? Still, the theory persisted. Books were written. Documentaries were made. People claimed the Soviet government knew about Yeti populations, kept them secret, covered up encounters, protected them as national secrets. It was sensational, it sold, it captured imaginations, but it wasn't science, it wasn't evidence-based, it was speculation built on speculation. The Yeti didn't kill the Dyatlov group, but the fact that people seriously considered it shows how desperate everyone was for an explanation. Any explanation, even impossible ones. Because the truth was, reality wasn't providing good answers. February 1st, 2nd, 1959, the phenomenon. One detail haunted investigators from the beginning. The bodies were partially undressed. Not all of them, but many. Igor in just a shirt and pants. The Yuris almost naked. Others wearing clothing taken from the dead. Why would people freezing to death remove clothing? It made no sense. Clothing is insulation, protection, life. Removing it is suicide. But it's documented. It has a name, paradoxical undressing. It's a known phenomenon in hypothermia deaths. Here's what happens. As your body temperature drops, your blood vessels constrict, pulling blood away from your skin, trying to protect your core. Your vital organs, this makes your skin cold, very cold, but your core is still warm, relatively. As hypothermia progresses, you become confused, disoriented. Your brain isn't getting enough oxygen, isn't functioning properly. You make bad decisions. You do irrational things. Eventually, your blood vessels give up. They dilate. Suddenly, all at once, blood rushes to your skin, to your extremities, and for a brief moment you feel hot, burning hot, irrationally hot. So you take off your clothes. You're dying, freezing to death, and you think you're overheating. You strip down, try to cool off, and you kill yourself faster. It's tragic, it's horrible. It's documented in about 25–50% of hypothermia deaths. The Dyatlov group showed this behavior. That supported the hypothermia conclusion, explained the undressing, made sense scientifically. But it didn't explain why they left the tent. Paradoxical undressing happens late, after hours of exposure, after significant hypothermia has set in. The Dyatlov group left the tent early, immediately, before they were hypothermic. What made them leave? That was the question paradoxical undressing couldn't answer. It explained their behavior after leaving. but not why they left in the first place. And that was the question that mattered most. 2000s, revisionist analysis. Some researchers started questioning everything, started from scratch, asked, what if the scene was staged? What if this wasn't what it appeared to be? What if someone made it look like an accident? The staging theory goes like this. The group was killed, murdered by someone with motive and means. The bodies were then arranged to look like a hiking accident. The tent cut from inside, the footprints created, the bodies placed at various distances. Why? To hide a murder, to protect someone, to prevent investigation. Who? Theories varied. Some said KGB, state security. The group had seen something they shouldn't have, knew something they shouldn't know, had to be silenced. Some said military, related to the weapons test theory. The group witnessed a test, were killed to preserve secrecy, then staged to look accidental. Some said personal. One of the group members had enemies, was targeted. The others were collateral damage, all killed to eliminate witnesses. The evidence, the inconsistencies, the impossible injuries, the strange behavior, the missing files, the government secrecy, all of it could be explained by staging, by cover-up, by someone with power and resources making a crime look like an accident. The problems, the logistics. How do you stage a scene like this? How do you make 9 sets of footprints in the snow? How do you place bodies at multiple locations without leaving your own tracks? How do you create injuries that look like falls and hypothermia without actually causing falls and hypothermia? It would require incredible planning, multiple people, sophisticated knowledge of forensics, and even then, it would be nearly impossible to pull off perfectly. The staging theory had appeal. It explained the secrecy, the cover-up, the unanswered questions, but it required more assumptions than it explained, required a conspiracy so complex it became its own mystery. Occam's razor suggested something simpler. 2024, 65 years later. Strip away all the theories, all the speculation, all the conspiracy. What are we left with? What do we know for absolute certain? 9 people went on a hiking expedition in January 1959. They were experienced, well-equipped, well-trained. This wasn't reckless. This was planned, professional. They camped on the slope of Khalat-Syakhl on the night of February 1st. This is documented, their diary entries, their photographs, their planned route. They were there. Something happened that night, something that made them cut their way out of their tent from the inside. Multiple cuts, deliberate, panicked. They left almost everything behind: boots, coats, supplies, everything they needed to survive. They walked away, down the slope, toward the tree line, 9 sets of footprints, walking, not running, not chaotic, orderly, purposeful, as if they knew where they were going, as if they had a plan. Some made it to the cedar tree, about 1.5 kilometers from the tent. They tried to start a fire, succeeded minimally. 2 of them climbed the tree, broke branches 5 meters up. Why? We don't know. 3 tried to return to the tent. They didn't make it, died along the way, hypothermia. Their bodies found at different distances, different positions, all trying to get back to shelter. 4 others went deeper into the forest, built or found shelter in a ravine, died there, some from hypothermia, some from massive internal injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, no external wounds. All 9 were dead within hours, maybe days. The bodies were found weeks and months later, some intact, some partially decomposed, all showing signs of hypothermia, some showing signs of trauma. That's what we know. Facts, documented, unquestionable. Everything else is theory, interpretation, guesswork. 2020s. What experts believe now. Most researchers today lean toward a natural explanation. Not murder, not military, not Yeti, not aliens. Something explainable by science, by nature, by the deadly combination of human error and environmental conditions. The leading theory is a combination, not one single cause, multiple factors, a perfect storm of bad luck. First, katabatic wind, cold air flowing down the mountain slope, creating unusual pressure, unusual sounds, possibly infrasound, causing panic, anxiety, fear. Second, avalanche risk, maybe not an actual avalanche, but the perception of one, the tent creaking, snow shifting, sounds that made them think catastrophe was imminent. Third, panic decision. In fear, they cut the tent, fled, thought they'd return once the danger passed, underestimated how quickly hypothermia would set in. Fourth, attempting survival, the cedar tree, the fire, the den in the ravine, all reasonable survival attempts, all ultimately failing because they didn't have proper equipment. Fifth, injuries from falls, in darkness, in snow, slipping on ice, falling into the ravine, landing on rocks hidden under snow, creating massive internal trauma without external wounds. Sixth, decomposition, the missing eyes and tongue, natural decomposition in water, scavenging by small animals, not mutilation, just nature. Seventh, the radiation, from Krivonishenko's work clothing, contaminated at Mayak, mixed in with other clothing as they tried to stay warm, not mysterious, just unfortunate. This explanation accounts for almost everything. The panic, the flight, the footprints, the injuries, the undressing, the deaths, all explained without resorting to murder, conspiracy, or the supernatural. It's not satisfying. It doesn't have a clear villain, no single cause to point to, no moment where everything went wrong, just a cascade of bad decisions made in fear, made in cold, made by people who thought they were doing the right thing but were actually sealing their doom. But even this consensus has doubters. 2024, what we still don't know. Even accepting the natural explanation, even agreeing on the probable sequence of events, questions remain, details that don't quite fit, pieces that don't quite connect. Question 1, why did they cut the tent at all? If they heard avalanche sounds, wouldn't they exit normally, through the entrance? Why slash the sides? Why multiple cuts? What were they cutting away from? Question 2, why the orderly footprints? If they were panicking, if they were fleeing in terror, why walk calmly? Why not run? Why not scatter? 9 people, all walking the same direction, all at the same pace. Why? Question 3, what caused the ravine injuries specifically? Falls can cause rib fractures, but bilateral rib fractures, both sides equally, and a skull fracture severe enough to embed bone in brain. Those require massive force, directed force. What did they fall onto? Where are the rocks? The investigators documented the ravine. No mention of particularly dangerous terrain. Question 4, the missing photographs. The cameras recovered had film. Most photos were developed, showed normal expedition activities. But one camera had frames that were either blank or showed unclear streaks of light, overexposure, damage to film. Or did they photograph something? Something that didn't develop properly, something the investigation didn't want to share. Question 5, Why did the government classify the case? If it was just a tragic accident, why the secrecy? Why seal the files for decades? Why ban hikers from the area for 3 years? What were they protecting? Question 6. The orange spheres. Multiple witnesses. Independent reports. What were they? Missiles, rockets, atmospheric phenomena. Why on that specific night? Why in that specific region? Coincidence or connection? Question 7. Semyon Zolotaryov, 38 years old, war veteran. Why join a student expedition? What was he doing there? Some researchers found evidence he might have had military intelligence connections. Was he there officially? Was he monitoring something? Or just a man who liked hiking? Question 8. The final photograph. On one of the cameras, the last photo taken before the incident shows nothing. Darkness, or possibly a light. Researchers have analyzed it, enhanced it, tried to determine what they were photographing. No consensus, no clear answer. What did they see in that moment? What were they trying to capture? These questions may never be answered. The people who knew are dead. The evidence is old, contaminated, incomplete. The passage of time has destroyed what little clarity there might have been. And that's the tragedy. Not just that 9 people died, but that we may never truly understand why. 2024, 65 years later. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become more than an unsolved mystery. It's become a cultural phenomenon. Books, documentaries, films, video games, podcasts, thousands of hours of analysis, millions of words written, all trying to answer one question: what happened on Dead Mountain? The site itself has become a pilgrimage destination. Every year, hikers attempt to retrace the group's steps, to camp where they camped, to feel what they felt. Some do it respectfully, honoring the dead. Others do it for thrills, for social media, for the story. In 2013, a memorial plaque was installed at the pass, dedicated to the 9 victims, their names, their ages, a simple acknowledgement that they existed, that they mattered, that they died here. Yuri Yudin visited many times before he died, stood where his friends had camped, tried to understand, tried to feel some connection to that night. He never found the answers he wanted, never found peace, died still wondering, still hoping someone would finally figure it out. The families are mostly gone now. Parents died decades ago. Siblings are elderly. The generation that knew the victims personally is fading. Soon, there will be no one left who remembers them as people, only as names in a famous mystery. The case files are public now, digitized, available online. Anyone can read them. Anyone can see the autopsy reports, the photographs, the investigators' notes. Transparency that came 60 years too late. Researchers continue working. New technologies, new analysis methods, DNA testing, advanced forensics, hoping to find something, anything, some detail that previous investigators missed, some evidence that finally explains everything. In 2019, Russian authorities said they'd solved it. Avalanche, case closed, again. In 2021, a team of scientists published evidence supporting the avalanche theory, detailed computer simulations, mathematical models, proof that it was possible. In 2023, other scientists published rebuttals, showing the avalanche theory had problems, didn't account for all the evidence, couldn't explain everything. The debate continues, will probably continue for decades more, because that's what the Dyatlov Pass incident has become. Not a tragedy to solve, but a mystery to debate, A puzzle that resists solution, a story that refuses to end. 9 young people went into the mountains in January 1959. They were excited, prepared, confident. They were going to conquer one of Russia's most difficult routes, earn their grade III certification, come home as heroes. They never came home. They died on a mountain the Mansi called dead, doing exactly what the mountain's name warned them not to do. And 65 years later, we still don't know exactly why. We have theories, educated guesses, probable explanations, but not certainty, not absolute truth, not the kind of answer that brings closure. Maybe we never will. Maybe the Dyatlov Pass incident is one of those mysteries that history refuses to solve. That stays forever in the realm of the unknown, the unexplained, the compelling. Or maybe tomorrow someone will find something, some piece of evidence, some forgotten document, some testimony that changes everything, that finally, after all these years, provides the answer. Until then, Dead Mountain keeps its secrets, and 9 young people remain frozen in time, forever 20-something, forever on an expedition, forever approaching Mount Atorn, forever telling us, don't go there. We should have listened. If stories like this matter to you, the ones with unanswered questions and details that never quite fit, consider subscribing. New true crime documentaries every week.